Hello everyone, my name is Kathryn Grayson Nanz, and I'm the developer advocate for Kendo React at Progress. But that wasn't what I always planned to be doing. In fact, I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in Studio Arts. I went to school to become a graphic designer, and I did. I worked in ad agencies for years afterwards. I could probably fill a whole second talk just talking about that experience of moving from design into development, but I really only bring it up here to give you guys a little context on why I'm here talking about design, and design systems specifically. Plenty of developers will hear the word design and just kind of immediately tune out, assuming that this is not something intended for them. But on the contrary, understanding your way around a design system will vastly improve your understanding of how designs and prototypes are meant to be translated into code, and make your life much easier by providing quick access to several resources. This speeds up the dev process exponentially, as well as reducing misunderstandings, mistakes, and frustrations. So, whether your team already has a design system and you're just not really sure what you're supposed to do with it, or maybe you just heard the term for the first time here and are curious what it really means. Either way, you are in the right place, because we're going to look at the purpose of a design system, what's often included in them, and how you can best leverage this resource as a developer to improve both your dev process and the user experience of your app or website. So let's start at the beginning. What is a design system? A design system is a collection of interconnected visual elements, organized and documented for easy reference. You can think of it like a library for all of the design resources and assets you could ever need, customized specifically for your app or site. It's similar to a component library, in the same way that user interfaces can be broken down into their building block components, then recombined in a variety of different ways. Designs can also be broken down into their smallest elements, things like fonts, colors, icons, images, copy, and more. Design systems are the documented collection of those elements and how they work together. But what's the purpose of a design system? Ultimately, they exist to provide consistency. They do this in a variety of ways and sometimes can have other benefits as well, but visual and language consistency are always the primary goals. Design systems create visual consistency by documenting the design decisions that have been made for your application, products, and brand. Doing things differently in different places, whether that's different places within your app or beyond, can create a frustrating and unintuitive user experience. It can also make your brand or your product look unprofessional, which leads to a low level of trust from your users. You don't want just one page of your app or your website to look completely different from the others. First impressions matter, and coming across as unorganized, or worse, like you're not sure what you're doing, isn't really helpful when you're trying to persuade someone to buy or use your product. From a developer perspective, this is most useful when you're thinking about the user interface of the app or the site. Unless the same developer is the one coding the UI in every single situation, then different people will make different personal judgment calls and different design decisions if there's not a single source of truth for them to refer to. And while many of these kinds of UX or UI decisions might feel small or even unnoticeable when you're making them, they do all add up for your users. This problem compounds itself if you're part of a larger team, or if you work somewhere with multiple different teams that are all focused on different parts of the application. Trying to work without a reference point slows everyone down, because making these decisions just takes time. Rehashing your UI choices, trying to remember how a situation was handled elsewhere in the app back when you built it like 5 or 6 months ago, all that kind of stuff breaks your flow and distracts you from the problem that you were previously focused on solving. By using a design system, you can avoid this. Developers and designers can quickly refer to it in moments of confusion and get back on track. Finally, not every developer enjoys or is really comfortable making design decisions. And as we mentioned, even those small choices do matter quite a bit. That's a lot of pressure to place on someone who doesn't have a design-focused skill set. And yet, the reality is that developers are asked to make design decisions on the fly pretty regularly. I think it's a good idea for developers to know some design basics, but at the end of the day, a lot of developers will feel relieved and happy to be able to defer that design knowledge to somebody else. And If all of your design knowledge has been captured in a design system, then they can do that without even having to send an email to a designer. Design systems are also hugely useful because they make sure that everyone is speaking the same language. Have you ever been in a situation where two people thought that they were disagreeing on something, only to discover that they were describing the same thing the whole time, just different ways? Maybe one person was calling something a toast notification and the other was calling it a snack bar. Or maybe your idea of sky blue is different than what your designer had in mind. When you're using multiple different libraries, different frameworks, different languages, whether that is computer programming languages or spoken languages, it can be incredibly easy to start to get those wires crossed. And those misunderstandings are almost inevitable when you're trying to describe visual elements without a visual example. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day what something is called, as long as you've all decided to call it the same thing. And design systems solve this problem intrinsically because you can't catalog something without also naming it. You might have heard the saying that there are only two hard things in programming: naming things, cache invalidation, and off-by-one errors. But seriously, I have found this to be especially useful in two main ways: your component names and your design token names. Naming and documenting your components as part of a design system ensures that everyone, not just the devs, knows what all the components are, what they're called, and what each one actually does. This gives designers the tools to talk about and make use of the components that you already have. Without it, I found that it's all too common to be asked to build something that is almost but not exactly the same as a component that you already have. If this sounds like a component library, then, well, yeah, it is. You're just including it as part of a larger design system because your components are part of the visual language of your application. Design tokens are the other place where you'll see a huge benefit. And if you're not familiar with that term, don't worry, we're going to define it in just a minute. The important thing to know for right now is that design tokens almost always align one-to-one with CSS properties. So making sure that they're labeled the same way across the code and the design software can really cut down on those miscommunications. All right, so what can you expect to find in a design system? Some of the most common elements include, but are not limited to, design tokens, grid systems, icon libraries, component designs, style guides, and brand language or tone of voice guides. We'll talk through each of these because they can just kind of sound like gibberish words if you're not familiar with them, and we'll discuss how you as a developer can make the best use of them. Design tokens are the very smallest parts of a design system. They're those little values that you find when you drill all the way down on an element. For example, you will often find design tokens for spacing, colors, fonts and font sizes, opacity, a border radius, etc. The US Web Design System website puts it very elegantly. Design tokens are a limited set of discrete options, just like a scale of musical notes is drawn from the spectrum of all possible frequencies. As we briefly mentioned just a second ago, the code equivalent to these tokens are your CSS properties. So storing all of these tokens as variables in your style sheets and applying them to your base elements makes your life a lot easier and your dev process a lot faster. It gives you all the ease and the benefits of using something like Bootstrap or Tailwind that gives you sets of preset styles to apply, but it comes with the distinct advantage of having all of those styles created thoughtfully and intentionally by your designers for your specific app and your user base. Icon libraries are, well, they're libraries of icons. The important part here is that all of the icons are cohesive. Whether that's a third-party library, something like Font Awesome that your design team has chosen to use exclusively, or a set of completely custom-designed icons that were made just for your brand, it's important that you've specified one set of icons so you don't end up using icons from various different sets that all have different illustration styles, line weights, look and feel, sizing. Whether your icon library is a collection of SVGs or an icon font, the important part is knowing what icons you have to choose from, what each one is called, and where you can find them. You might already be familiar with component libraries. They're collections of every component that's used in an app, as well as their documentation. One of the main benefits of a design system is sharing what was previously a team-specific resource with people who are outside that team. This is a great example of how design systems really are a two-way street. This is not just a collection of exclusively design stuff for designers. It's a place for designer-developer collaboration. Documenting your components is also an incredibly helpful thing you can do to speed up the onboarding of your new team members, whether those are designers or developers. Nothing will help you get a feel for an application faster than being able to look at the building blocks that make it up, seeing all the variations, the designs, how they're used. This is also incredibly helpful if you have non-standard or application-specific components that new folks might not recognize by name alone. For example, I once worked at a company where the walk-around was a really common and often used component. But if you had not learned all of the company-specific lingo yet, then that word is pretty much meaningless. It described a component that was a custom data visualization, but again, probably not something that you would have guessed. If you work at a company that has a specific and kind of different internal language, then design systems are a great way to codify that for new employees. Since the advent of CSS Grid systems have been getting a lot of attention on the dev side. But over on the design side, they're not really a new concept. The idea of using a grid to organize and lay out elements is just about as old as design itself. Print designers used grids to fit information on physical pages and create a visual hierarchy to guide the viewer's eye through the content. The same concepts work equally well for UI design. In fact, all web and UI design is naturally very grid-based, just due to the way that HTML and CSS works. Kind of a match made in heaven. By creating grid systems that can be reused for different pages of your app or site, you can really speed up the time it takes to create designs and build out interfaces. It also helps to establish consistency. When the layout is predictable, users quickly learn where they can expect various elements to live and what they can expect to happen when they interact with things. Without this kind of visual consistency, it takes a lot longer for your users to figure out what's happening on each page and where they need to go to accomplish their tasks. Not to mention, using a grid system is kind of like starting both your design and your dev processes with a cheat code. It gives you a template you can start with instead of working up from scratch with a completely blank page every time. Style guides are kind of the original design system. They document the high-level rules for a brand's visual presentation. This generally includes a handful of most used design tokens, like brand colors and fonts, but also things like examples of the type of imagery that should be chosen, whether you want to use fun, playful, colorful illustrations, or more serious black and white photography. They also include any logos, logo variations, as well as any brand-specific characters or icons. It's basically a place to document brand-related assets and provide instructions for their use. Style guides are incredibly useful as a quick summary of your brand that you can hand to contract workers, ad agencies, freelancers, anyone outside your company who will still need to make use of your brand assets. It ensures that you still get that consistent look and feel, even when the work is being done by people who are less familiar with your brand. It's a handy document to have for folks who will need some information, but not quite the same level of detail as a full-time employee. Finally, a great thing to include in a design system is a brand language or a tone of voice guide. Capturing a feeling or a tone can be really difficult, but the way that you talk to your users has a huge impact. How casual or formal you are, whether you include little jokes or quips in your copy or keep it very serious and straight-laced, whether you use contractions or do not. All of that adds up to the way that your brand sounds when your users are navigating your app. It kind of gives your brand and your application a personality. You might be quick to assume that this doesn't matter for developers, since we're not the ones that do the copywriting. However, based on experience, I would be willing to bet that you have written more microcopy than you think. Developers often end up filling in those little bits of copy during the feature development process. Stuff like button text, form labels, captions, alt text. Again, those things maybe feel small, but they matter. Having a brand language guide can help you choose between let's go or start, and those do feel very different to your users. To sum things up, both you and your users benefit when designers and developers are equipped to work well together. Design systems are a fantastic way to accomplish this goal. by providing a single source of truth that both parties can refer to, as well as a space for collaboration and conversation. Having all of this compiled makes it easy for developers to onboard new team members, quickly find answers to basic questions, download common assets like logos and icons, and so much more. Not to mention the overall consistency and ease of communication that a design system provides, ensuring that everyone is always speaking the same language. If you have one at your company and you haven't been making use of it, hopefully this has inspired you to start taking advantage of such a great resource. And if you don't have one yet, maybe it can be your next big project. Your coworkers will definitely appreciate it. Thank you.